The sun bled over the horizon like a wound refusing to close. In the town of Red Hollow, silence was currency, and everyone knew better than to ask where the screams came from. Inside an abandoned livery barn, a girl stood barefoot on a wooden crate, wrists chained to a rusted beam. The men watching looked like vultures circling a dying calf. The auctioneer's voice cracked through the heat. Next one, 19, strong, no kin to claim her. His grin showed more greed than teeth. The girl's name was Lydia Merrick, though no one had spoken it in months. Her eyes were the color of burnt honey, too tired to cry, too proud to beg. $10, the auctioneer barked. No answer. 5 then. She ain't worth her weight in mule feed? From the back, a voice cut through the murmurs, calm, even, but heavy as judgment. I'll pay 20. Heads turned. Marshal Jonas Reed stepped forward, hat low, coat dusted with miles of road. His badge caught the dim light like an unwanted truth. The crowd shifted uneasily. No man with a badge should have been there, but he was. When the gavel hit wood, the sound echoed like a verdict. Lydia didn't move, didn't even breathe. And Jonas, standing before her, realized he hadn't bought a person, he'd just purchased a sin that might never wash clean. The road out of Red Hollow stretched long and mean, beneath a sky bruised purple by dusk. Jonas Reed rode slow beside his horse, reins loose in one hand, while the girl trailed a few steps behind, her bare feet stirring little clouds of dust. The iron cuffs clinked with each stride, a grim reminder that freedom came with a price tag and she hadn't decided if she wanted to pay it. The land around them was dying, grass brittle as bone, the creek a ribbon of mud. Farther off, the ruins of a burned homestead stood black against the horizon, chimney stone and ash, same as half the county after the war. Jonas had seen too many like it. Too many families erased because somebody richer needed their dirt. He stopped beside an old cottonwood and turned. Hold still. From his coat pocket, he pulled a key, the metal cold against her skin as the cuffs fell away. No one wears those in my county, he said quietly. Lydia rubbed her wrists, eyes hard. Guess you own me now, Marshal. He met her stare. I don't own a soul. You walk free from here. She almost laughed. Free? Ain't that the word men use when they mean alone? Jonas didn't answer. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of rain and gun oil. Somewhere behind them, thunder rolled like distant artillery. He looked west, where the last light bled across the desert. A place this empty had no mercy, only men pretending they carried it. And as Lydia walked ahead without a word, Jonas knew that saving her was only the beginning of another kind of reckoning, one he'd been running from since the war ended. By the second night, they reached Cedar Bluff, a ghost of a town built on forgotten promises. The sheriff's office stood crooked against the wind, one lantern swaying in the dark like a tired eye refusing to sleep. Jonas tied his horse and led Lydia inside. The room smelled of dust, whiskey, and regret. He poured water into a tin cup and handed it to her. She stared at it for a long while before drinking. Her hands shook, not from fear, but from exhaustion that had turned into habit. You got someone looking for you? He asked. She laughed, low and sharp. If they were, they'd have sold me first. Jonas leaned back against the desk. The man who ran that auction pike, he's been moving folks through this county for months. Slavers, debt collectors, call themselves agents. I've been tracking him. Then why'd you stop bidding and start saving? She asked coldly. He hesitated, thumb brushing the edge of his badge. Because I saw your father hang in the square when I was a deputy. He didn't deserve it. Neither do you. Her eyes darkened, a storm behind calm glass. My father died a traitor. No, Jonas said quietly. He died honest. And men like Pike made sure no one remembered it that way. Outside, hooves thundered against the hard-packed earth. Jonas stiffened, stepping to the window. 5 riders, shadows against the dying light. One wore a black hat, broad and mean. Lydia's breath caught. That's him. Jonas loaded his revolver, the click echoing through the small room. Then I reckon he's here to buy her back, or to bury the debt he sold. He blew out the lantern. Stay quiet. Tonight, Red Hollow's ghosts are coming for blood. The sound came first, the metallic groan of saddle leather, the low murmur of men who'd killed before. Jonas counted 5 shadows outside the window, rifles glinting in the rainlight, the black hat in the middle tilted back. And a voice called through the dark. "Marshal Reed, you got something of mine." Jonas didn't answer. He pulled the hammer back on his revolver. The slow, deliberate click loud as a heartbeat. Lydia crouched beside the desk, breath trembling. Pike's voice came again. "You think buying her makes her yours? You think a badge changes what she is?" Jonas stepped into the open doorway, lantern light framing his silhouette. "She's not property. Not in this town." Laughter spilled across the yard, cold and ugly. Pike swung down from his horse. "That badge don't mean a thing past the river, Reed. You know that. You work the border same as me. Law's just a word men hide behind." Maybe," Jonas said, "but it's the only word that ever kept the wolves from eating each other." Pike's grin widened. "Then maybe I'm the wolf you forgot to shoot." Lightning flashed, white and sharp, cutting across the yard. When the thunder rolled, the first shot followed. Jonas fired, and one of Pike's men dropped in the mud. The others scattered for cover. "Stay low," Jonas barked. Lydia crawled toward the back window. Outside, the wind howled through broken shutters. Pike shouted orders, his men firing into the building. Bullets splintered the walls, filling the air with sawdust and smoke. Jonas ducked behind the doorframe, returning fire in short, brutal bursts. For every shot, he thought of the faces he'd failed. Men, women, children whose names were buried under dust and silence. Another crash, the window shattered behind them. A man climbed through, shotgun raised. Lydia moved before she could think. She grabbed the iron poker from the stove and swung with all the strength left in her body. The blow caught him across the temple, sending him sprawling. Jonas turned, eyes wide. "You ever done that before?" She panted, gripping the poker tight. "Once. Didn't end this well." Jonas almost smiled, but then Pike's shadow filled the doorway. The outlaw's coat was soaked through, his face lined with rain and rage. "You don't know when to quit, do you?" Pike sneered. Jonas leveled his gun. "I did once. Back when I should have stopped you the first time." "Ah," Pike said, stepping closer. "So you remember. That night at the Whitfield farm. You were there. Same as me." Jonas's finger froze on the trigger. "You set that fire, and you watched it burn?" Pike spat. "Ain't much difference between us, Marshal." Lydia's eyes widened. "You were there?" Jonas couldn't look at her. "I tried to stop it." "You watched," Pike said, while her family screamed. Oh, something broke inside Jonas then, not rage, not guilt, but the kind of quiet resolve a man only finds when he's run out of prayers. He fired. The bullet tore through Pike's shoulder, spinning him backward into the rain. Lydia grabbed the fallen shotgun and followed Jonas out into the yard. The storm had broken open, rain falling hard enough to turn the dirt to rivers. Pike stumbled toward his horse, clutching his arm. Jonas called after him, "You run, and I swear you'll never make it to the ridge." Pike turned, grinning through the pain. "You can't outrun what you are, Reed. You're just another sinner wearing a badge." He fired wildly, the shot grazing Jonas's arm. Jonas dropped to one knee, returning fire, but the rain blurred his aim. Pike's horse bolted, vanishing into the darkness beyond the corral. Lydia ran to Jonas, pressing her hand against his wound. "You're bleeding." He gritted his teeth. "Not enough to stop." Then what are we waiting for?" she said. "He's heading for the ridge." Jonas stood, blood mixing with the rain, and mounted his horse. "Stay here." She swung up behind him before he could protest. "You'll need someone to watch your back." He looked over his shoulder, meeting her eyes through the storm. "You can shoot? Better than I can pray." They rode hard into the night, the rain lashing their faces, thunder rolling over the plains like the voice of a god long gone deaf. The ridge rose ahead, a jagged line of stone cutting through the valley. Lightning flashed again, revealing Pike's silhouette at the top, rifle in hand. He turned and fired. The shot whined past Lydia's ear. She ducked low, clinging to Jonas as they dismounted behind a fallen log. Jonas reloaded, fingers slick with blood and mud. "He's running for the old mine shaft." "Why?" Lydia whispered. "Because that's where he keeps his secrets," Jonas said grimly. They moved uphill, slow and silent. The rain softened to mist, steam rising from the ground where lightning had struck. Inside the mine, the air was thick with rot and memory. Lantern light flickered off damp walls, revealing crates, papers, and chains, dozens of them. Lydia's breath caught. "These are names," she whispered, scanning the ledgers stacked against the wall. "People he sold." Jonas nodded, jaw tight. "Evidence. Enough to hang him twice." A gun cocked behind them. Pike stepped from the shadows, blood on his shirt and madness in his eyes. "Then I reckon I'll have to hang first." He fired. The bullet tore through Jonas's side, sending him crashing into a crate. Lydia screamed, grabbing the revolver from the floor. Pike advanced, grinning. "You think you can save him? Girl, you ain't nothing but another name on my list." Her hands shook, but her eyes didn't waver. "Not this time." She fired. The shot hit Pike square in the chest. He staggered back, disbelief twisting his face, then fell into the mud. Silence filled the cave thick, final. Rain hissed at the entrance, washing away the blood that seeped toward the light. Lydia dropped the gun, running to Jonas. His face was pale, lips tight with pain. "You." Shot straight. He managed. She pressed her hands to the wound. "I learned from the best." He smiled weakly. "Guess that makes us even." But as the storm outside began to fade, they both knew the truth. Nothing about this would ever be even. Not after the lives lost. Not after the fire that had burned too long. By dawn, Pike's body was gone, washed down the gully by the night's flood. Only his ledger remained. Jonas stuffed it into his saddlebag, swaying as he mounted his horse. Lydia climbed up beside him. "We take this to the capital," he said. "Let them see what justice really looks like." And what about us?" she asked softly. He looked toward the horizon, where the clouds were breaking apart into pale gold. "We'll figure that out when we stop running." They rode until the sun rose behind them, their shadows stretching long across the wet plains. Neither spoke. The silence between them wasn't fear anymore, it was something heavier, quieter. Something like forgiveness trying to find its way through the mud. By the time they reached town again, the rain had turned to mist. People watched from behind windows as the marshal and the girl rode in, both covered in blood and ash. Jonas dismounted, unsteady, and handed the ledger to his deputy. "Lock it up. Every name in there deserves to be read out loud." The deputy nodded, eyes wide. "And Pike?" Jonas looked toward the ridge, where the storm had died. "He's gone. Let the earth keep him." Lydia stood beside him, her hand brushing his just once before she turned toward the cabin. "You said once no one wears chains in your county," she said softly. "That still true?" He met her gaze, tired, but clear. "It is now." For the first time since she could remember, she smiled, not wide, not easy, but real. 3 days passed before the blood dried from the streets of Cedar Bluff. The town had gone quiet again, too quiet. Jonas Reed sat in his office, pale and stitched, his arm in a sling. The wound in his side ached every time he breathed, but it wasn't the kind that killed a man. It was the kind that reminded him he'd survived, and survival had its own costs. The ledger from Pike's mine lay open on the desk before him. Page after page of names, dates, and prices. Each line was a life bought and traded. Lydia sat across from him, her hands folded, eyes fixed on the pages like she was staring down ghosts. "You're sure these names are real?" she asked quietly. Jonas nodded. "Every one of them. He didn't just sell people. He sold families, split them, erased them, buried them under new names." Her jaw tightened. "Then we make them known again." He met her gaze, weary but resolute. "That's what I aim to do." "Oh." Before he could close the book, a shadow filled the doorway. Deputy Tom Avery stepped in, hat in hand, his face drawn. "Marshal," he said. "We got trouble." Jonas straightened. "What kind?" Tom hesitated. "A rider came in from Red Hollow. Said the governor's men are on their way. They claim Pike was part of a bigger trade ring, one backed by folks higher up the chain. They don't want this ledger going public." Lydia's eyes narrowed. "You mean they want to bury it?" Tom nodded grimly. "And anyone holding it." Jonas's hand closed around the book. "Then they'll have to dig deep." That night, The air felt thick as smoke before a fire. Rain threatened again, whispering against the eaves. Lydia sat by the window, staring out into the dark. The faint light from the lantern carved her face into planes of shadow and gold. "You should rest," Jonas said. She turned, half smiling. "You should too." "Can't," he muttered. "Never could when the law starts knocking on the wrong doors." She crossed her arms. "You really think they'll come for you?" He looked down at the badge on his chest, tarnished, scarred, still shining faintly in the light. "I think the law don't like men who make it mean something again." Thunder rolled over the plains. Then came the sound of hooves, slow at first, then faster. Jonas grabbed his revolver and blew out the lantern. "Down," he whispered. 5 horses, 6 maybe. The silhouette stopped just outside the sheriff's office. A man called out, "Marshal Reed, by order of the state, you're to surrender all evidence seized from the late Jeb Pike." "Now." Jonas didn't move. The voice came again, sharper. "That ledger ain't yours to keep," Lydia whispered. "They'll kill you." "Maybe," he said quietly, "but not before they find out I've already sent a copy." Her eyes widened. "You did?" He smiled faintly. "Ryder left at dawn. Headed east. Town preacher owed me a favor." Outside, boots hit the ground. Doors creaked. Jonas could see the faint glow of torches through the window. "Get out the back," he said. "I'm not leaving you." Wasn't asking, but Lydia didn't move. She picked up Pike's rifle and stood beside him. "You saved me once. Now we do it together." Jonas sighed. "You're more stubborn than a desert mule. Must have learned it from you." The door burst open. A flash of lightning filled the room, followed by gunfire. Jonas fired first, dropping the man in the doorway. 2 more came through, shouting. Lydia aimed and squeezed the trigger. The blast threw one back into the rain. The other ducked behind a barrel, returning fire. Jonas rolled behind the desk, bullets shredding the papers around him. He fired twice, then heard the satisfying click of silence empty. "Out!" he barked. Lydia grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the back door. They stumbled into the alley, rain soaking them to the bone. The sound of boots pounded behind them. Jonas shoved Lydia toward the stables. "Get on." She hesitated. "Not without you." He turned, firing once more to slow their pursuers. "Ride." She didn't. She grabbed his hand instead, dragging him into the shadows behind a wagon as more riders thundered past. One torch hit the side of the sheriff's office, catching fire instantly. Flames clawed up the wooden walls. Jonas stared at it, face hollow. That building held every truth I had left. "Then we make new ones," Lydia said fiercely. He looked at her, really looked, and nodded once. "All right." They rode out through the rain, the fire behind them lighting up the night like the end of the world. By dawn, they reached the ridge again. The old mine mouth yawned before them, dark and wet. Jonas dismounted, breathing hard. "They won't stop," Lydia said. "Even if the ledger's gone." Jonas nodded slowly. "Then maybe it's time I stopped running." He reached into his coat and pulled out the original book. "Here's the truth. But truth's got a habit of getting men killed. So you take it." She frowned. "No. If you're staying, so am I." He shook his head. "You still got years ahead, Lydia. Me? I spent mine looking away from the fire." Before she could speak, the sound of horses echoed up the trail. More men, 6 at least. Jonas handed her the book. "There's a creek that feeds into the eastern pass. Follow it. It'll take you to Carson's Ferry. There'll be someone waiting." Her voice cracked. "Jonas." He touched her shoulder, gentle but firm. "Go." The first shot cracked across the ridge. Jonas turned, revolver drawn. The riders were close now, their torches cutting through the mist like eyes of devils. He took cover behind the rocks, firing slow, measured. Each pull of the trigger felt like a confession. When he finally looked back, Lydia was gone. Relief and grief tangled in his chest. He'd given her a chance. That had to be enough. The gunfire grew louder. Bullets hit stone, splintered wood. Jonas felt one graze his leg, another tear through his hat. He reloaded, teeth gritted. Then, above the roar of thunder, a single rifle cracked from somewhere behind the enemy line. One rider dropped. Another turned and fell. Jonas blinked through the smoke. From the fog, Lydia appeared, rifle braced against her shoulder, eyes steady. "Thought I told you to run," he shouted. "You did," she called back, firing again. "Didn't say I'd listen." Together they held the ridge, side by side, until the rain swallowed the gunfire. When the last man fell, silence rolled in like fog. Jonas sank to his knees, bleeding, exhausted. Lydia dropped beside him, grabbing his arm. "You're hit bad," she said. He smiled weakly. "Could be worse. You could have missed." She laughed once, breath hitching. "What now?" Jonas looked toward the east. The faintest light was breaking through the clouds. "Now we ride," he said. "You deliver that ledger. Make them say those names out loud. And you?" He looked back toward Cedar Bluff, where smoke still rose in the distance. "Someone's got to clean up what's left." They buried the last of Pike's men in the ridge soil, unmarked graves under a sky too tired for thunder. Jonas packed his revolver, his badge, and half a letter he'd started writing years ago addressed to no one, ended with, "I'm sorry." When Lydia mounted her horse, she looked down at him. "You'll find me again? If the trail's kind," he said. "If not, just keep riding till the ghosts get tired." She nodded, eyes bright with everything she couldn't say. Then she kicked her horse into motion, riding east into the breaking dawn. Jonas watched until she was a blur against the light. Then he turned back toward town. The road was long, but for the first time in years, it didn't feel like punishment. It felt like purpose. As the morning wind swept across the ridge, the last pages of Pike's ledger tore loose from the saddlebag and fluttered into the sky, names and numbers scattering into the light. No longer secrets, no longer owned. And in that fragile, fleeting moment, Jonas Reed, Marshal, sinner, savior, finally understood what freedom really cost. A week later, the dust had settled over Cedar Bluff like a burial shroud. Smoke no longer rose from the sheriff's office. Only the smell of ash and rain-washed wood. Jonas Reed sat on the porch of the half-burned building, arm wrapped tight in bandages, his revolver laid across his lap. The town was quiet, save for the echo of Hammer's men rebuilding what they once feared to lose. Lydia Merrick had made it to Carson's Ferry 3 days earlier. Word came back with a preacher's wagon that she'd handed over the ledger to a circuit judge openly, without fear, her name signed beneath every testimony. By dawn the next day, papers were printed across 3 counties, naming every man who had dealt with Pike's trade. Some were dead, others powerful and alive, but the truth had teeth, and it was finally biting back. Jonas hadn't slept since. The pain in his ribs was nothing compared to the ache that came from still breathing. He had thought of leaving riding south to disappear like all the other lawmen who'd run out of purpose, but each morning, the sight of townsfolk fixing what they'd once ignored made him stay. Deputy Avery stepped up onto the porch, wiping sweat from his neck. "Marshal," he said. "Judge wired a message. Said Miss Merrick's staying on as a witness. She's safe." Jonas nodded slowly. "She'll do fine. Town's asking what we do next," the deputy said. "Now that the names are out." Jonas looked down the street at the blacksmith's hammer, at children chasing a ball past the churchyard, at the scars still fresh on every wall. "We keep the doors open," he said. "That's all justice ever was, keeping the doors open so the truth's got somewhere to walk in." Avery hesitated. "And you?" Jonas smiled faintly. "Guess I'll stay until the quiet stops feeling strange." That evening, as the sun sank behind the ridge, a rider appeared from the east. Dust clung to her hat, her coat, her smile. Lydia dismounted slow, limping slightly, but her eyes were steady as ever. "You didn't think I'd vanish, did you?" she said. Jonas stood, trying to hide the way his shoulders eased. "Figured you might have found something better than this place." She shook her head. "Not yet. Maybe I came back to finish something." He gestured to the porch beside him. "Reckon I could use the help." They sat in silence for a while, watching the last light fade. The air smelled of dust and honeysuckle, the kind that only bloomed after rain. Lydia pulled a folded paper from her coat and handed it to him. "Judge Price wrote this. Says the state's setting up a formal inquiry into Pike's network. They're calling it the Red Hollow Trials." Jonas unfolded the letter. The ink bled slightly from the rain, but the words were clear. It was more justice than he'd ever expected. "You did this," he said quietly. She shook her head. We did. You bought my freedom. I just made sure it stayed bought. Jonas laughed once, soft and tired. You ever think about leaving again? Every day, she admitted. But every time I do, I remember there's still someone here trying to make the badge mean something. He looked at her, the sunset burning gold in her eyes. Ain't sure I ever did. Maybe not, she said. But you kept wearing it. That counts. When night came, the lanterns flickered across town porches, windows, even the saloon that once served Pike's men. The air felt cleaner, quieter. Lydia leaned against the porch rail, her voice barely above the crickets. You think it ever ends, Jonas? The fight? He considered that, long and slow. Maybe not. Maybe it just changes shape, turns into something smaller, something you can live with. She smiled faintly. And if we can't? He looked out toward the ridge, where the stars began to pierce the dark. Then we make peace with the ghosts and keep ridin'. Lydia nodded, the wind tugging at her hair. Then I guess I'll be riding a long time. He glanced at her, eyes soft. Not alone, you won't. They sat there until the lamps burned low, until the sound of rebuilding gave way to the gentle hum of night. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled, not the angry kind, but soft, like the sky remembering a story it no longer needed to tell. And in that silence, under the same stars that had watched them through fire and rain, Jonas Reed finally let himself believe that redemption didn't always come with a price. Sometimes, it came with someone who refused to let you pay it alone. 2 years later, the wind on the ridge sang a softer tune. The land had greened again, grass rippling like a living sea where ash once lay. Cedar Bluff was no longer a ghost town. The saloon had music, the church had laughter, and the gallows behind the jailhouse had long been torn down for firewood. Jonas Reed rode up the slope, slower now, the years heavy in his bones but not yet unkind. Beside him, Lydia Merrick guided her mare with the quiet grace of someone who'd learned to let the world move without fighting it. The morning sun spilled over the plains, painting the rocks gold. At the top of the ridge stood the same oak tree that had survived every storm. Its bark bore new carvings, names freshly etched by careful hands. Lydia dismounted and knelt, tracing one of the marks. Eleanor Merrick, Thomas Merrick. The names of her parents. You came back, Jonas said quietly. I had to, she replied. The dead deserve to be remembered in light, not in fire. He nodded. You rebuilt what they burned. She smiled faintly. We did. Jonas leaned against the tree, hat in hand. You ever miss the road? Sometimes, she said. But it's not the running I miss. It's the feeling that something's waiting at the end of it. He looked out over the valley, where Cedar Bluff shimmered in the distance like a town born from prayer. Maybe it's waiting right here. Ugh. For a while, neither spoke. A hawk circled overhead. The wind carried the smell of cedar and wild sage. Then Lydia reached into her satchel and pulled out a small silver locket. She placed it at the base of the oak, beside a worn tin badge that caught the sunlight. Some things belong to the past, she said softly. Jonas watched the two relics glint together, symbols of a fire that had burned, and a promise that had outlived it. When she stood, he offered his hand to help her mount. You ready? She smiled. Always. They rode down the ridge side by side, their shadows stretching long across the open plain. Behind them, the oak tree stood tall, its carvings shining in the new sun, no longer a monument to loss, but to what had survived it. And as the trail bent toward the horizon, the wind carried their laughter through the hills, light, untethered, and free. For the first time in years, Cedar Bluff slept without ghosts.